welcome back to the Co-op Gaming Arena in Emmett, Oklahoma. My name is Coach Ben, and this is the first lecture of the new year. It's been a couple of weeks. People have kind of gotten cozy, gotten infected. There's lots of fun going on in the spring. So today, and kind of this semester in general, I really want to do a series that is more universally adaptable to titles. And I want to really intently focus on internal reflection and self-awareness and resiliency. And so this is kind of the first video in those series. This content should be useful to you even if you're not a Smash Bros. Player. You can play fighting games, you play racing games, or pretty much any kind of competitive experience. I think it'll be useful to kind of sit through some of these lectures. Okay. So today we're going to be talking about the Dunning-Kruger effect. This was really a formative text for me. Like this is a really valuable and life-changing document and idea for me when I was a young player. Back when I was like 2011, I think I was kind of like mid-silver League of Legends player, and one day I just kind of randomly happened upon this psychological idea, and it kind of changed the way that I thought about growth and the way I thought about why I was winning or losing. And I think that it would benefit almost everybody to understand what this idea is and what it looks like and how to be self-aware of it, because it really, I don't know, you can get bogged down, especially if you're a mid-level player wanting to improve. I think your mentality can really hold you back a lot of the time. And so having a way to, be more self-aware of the cognitive biases that hold us back is so important for improvement, and especially, getting better rapidly. Okay, so some stuff we're going to talk about. You see Sakurai still joining us for efficiency purposes. So we're going to talk about, what the Dunning-Kruger effect even is. The wiki page. We're going to describe a little bit about what internal versus external blame looks like. We're going to relate it to the game experience, and then we're also kind of going to discuss it a little bit farther. This is a very, thinking kind of lecture. So, put on your thinking cap and be prepared to reflect inward. So what is the Dunning-Kruger effect anyway? I'll give you this quote that's here at the top. It's in bold. I'll kind of just briefly overview it. So in psychology, right, the Dunning-Kruger effect, which, if you didn't know, it's named after two people whose names were Dunning and Kruger. Like, that's the point. Like, they're like, hey, this is a thing, and here's a study about it. And they're like, cool, we'll name it after you. So in psychology, the Dunning-Kruger effect is a type of cognitive bias where people with limited knowledge or competence in a given intellectual or social domain greatly overestimate their own knowledge or competence in that domain relative to an objective criteria or to the performance of their peers or even people in general. Now that's what it says in front of us, but I'm not going to lie, this is a really wordy paragraph, so I'm going to try to really restate the idea multiple times, because I think it's hard to get the idea fully just by reading the Wikipedia page. It's not immediately apparent. So, first, what is cognitive bias? Well, a cognitive bias is really simple. So the easiest way you can think about it is a cognitive thoughts, right, and bias, or it affects how you think before you even get to think about it. So in other words, a form of cognitive bias would be if a tornado comes through and the sky is green, and you get tornadoes every single night, and you're used to the sky being green, you have a cognitive bias of the sky's always green. That's normal, right? And so if you go somewhere else and there's no tornado, and the sky is blue all of a sudden, you're like, oh, that's weird, right? Isn't this weird for you guys? But it's not actually weird. Your prior thoughts and the way that you're approaching the situation is giving you flawed judgment in the situation. I know that's probably about the most Oklahoman analogy possible. Anyway, so there's some key words here, right? It's a systematic error. You cannot avoid it. It affects everything that you do, and it poisons your thoughts. Because before you've even absorbed the information, you've already partially made up your mind on it based on your cognitive bias. So some examples of this is I'm only listening to information that confirms your beliefs. You see this a lot with elderly folks. They'll have favorites for news stations, and they'll be very derogatory of other news stations. They'll be like, yeah, I only watch this show, or like this channel is nothing, and it's useless. Like, it's okay to disagree with stuff, but I think that just wholeheartedly throwing out everything is in itself a bias. Or believing that you were going to win before a match starts. So, for example, if you've ever heard anybody say, like, after a basketball game, like, oh, I totally knew that so-and-so was going to drop 30 points this game. He's the GOAT. Like, no, you did not. You have no idea. It hasn't happened yet. And thinking that you do is a cognitive bias. You're assuming something that's just not true. And then finally, there's this idea called the actor-observer bias, which is really important for Dunning-Kruger in particular. It's a really simple idea. When I lose, I did everything right, and something else was the reason why I lost. But when they lose, I was the better player, and I outskilled them, and they're just bad at the game. Now, that statement should resonate very deeply with anybody who's ever played video games, because it's one of the most tempting and juicy thoughts to ever process, and it's one of the most toxic and destructive, unproductive thoughts that you could ever have, because it is false. It is a cognitive bias. It is a falsehood and a flawed way of thinking about the game that is preventing you from improving yourself with a clear mind. Now, these examples that I'm listing here at the bottom, they're not all exactly the Dunning-Kruger effect. I just want to kind of get the audience in, the right mindset to be thinking about what we're talking about. So, the word that's important here is metacognition, right? Metacognition, in other words, let's break it down again. Cognition being thought. Meta being like fourth wall breaking, So it's metacognition. It is thinking about how to think. That is the subject of today. We are thinking about our thinking. And so, the Dunning-Kruger effect is, if you are not very skilled or not very knowledgeable about a subject, odds are very good that you might have this very false and inflated sense of confidence in your mastery of that subject. And the inverse is true, where people who are very qualified at the subject are like, no, I'm not that good. I only know how to do this and this. Like, there's a whole lot more I could work on. And so this can be broken down even more simply. So essentially, once you reach a certain point of ignorance on a subject, and again, this slide is labeled source subject. I want to be very careful here to illustrate this point. Ignorance should not be don't hear that word in a negative context. I'm trying to use it as neutrally as possible. If you are ignorant to something, it means that you don't know about it. That's it. I'm just trying to use it in a very sterile clinical setting. So please, don't take a wounded arrow to the pride at the idea that, oh God, this guy's calling me ignorant, I don't know anything. Like, no, I'm not saying that. Ignorance is just a lack of knowledge in this context. And again, this is all very clinical. It's psychology, right? So again, try to have an objective process about everything when you reflect on all of this. So the idea is, past a certain point of ignorance, you are actually so ignorant of the concept that you're not even able to be aware of your own ignorance. In other words, you have to have a minimum bar of understanding and skill and competency to even understand what competency looks like. Does that make sense? So this is a big problem. You might, the way that this can apply to fighting games, for example, or like maybe League of Legends, right? So if you say League of Legends, like an example of the Dunning-Kruger effect would be that, like, oh, my laning is fine, but the jungler comes and I just get camped every game. My laning is superior and elite. And I make no flaws and I'm perfect all the time, and I just get camped every game by the jungler. The statement is entirely bereft of any self-reflection on how the laning process might actually be derived from your own decision-making, and being camped a whole lot is actually just a side effect of the decisions that you make in the lane. It's essentially avoiding responsibility and accountability for your own decisions by saying, I know what I'm doing. I make good decisions. It's other reasons why I'm being bad. And this results in just kind of this destructive feedback loop, especially in team-based games. Because what happens is you end up saying, okay, well, I did fine and I won my lane, but my mid laner, my mercy support is awful, and they lost the game, blah, blah, blah. They're terrible. They can't aim. They overextend all the time, or they're 0 and 5, and they're so heavy, and I can't carry them. It's all the same. It's all the same flavor of denial and the bias, right? Where you're fixating on, I lost. Why did I lose? I didn't lose because I made mistakes. I lost because of this reason, and this reason, and that reason, and this reason. And these flaws, this flawed way of thinking where you overfixate on external problems, overwhelmingly crosses over with the Dunning-Kruger effect. So essentially, like, since you don't understand the game well enough that you can even understand why your own decisions are not like winning the game or winning interactions or doing well, you've settled for blaming external problems because you don't understand the game well enough to even explain how you could be doing it better. This is really kind of where people get stuck in a rut, you know. So like this is the problem, is you end up blaming external stuff, and people spend years going 2-2. They spend years in silver, and it's because they're incapable of being accountable for their own gameplay and being accountable for their own results. And that's the most important first step to defeating this idea. Like, it's totally cool to not understand something. Everybody is at that point at some point. Like, everybody's got to be new eventually. What is really important, and I think kind of the theme of what you should be getting out of this lecture, is that it is very important to be thinking about your own thoughts and how you are reflecting on wins and losses, especially when you are a 0-2 player, a 1-2 player, a 2-2 player. If you are, the bronze Yasuo or the silver Mercy or whatever, those are the situations where you're kind of in the middle of the pack of skill. There's a long way to go. It's okay to be ignorant about things about the game. You have plenty of time to learn how to play the game, but you have to be aware that there is room for you to grow, and that the way for you to improve is to not blame external factors, but to work on your own gameplay. So for fighting games, it's, my controller has drift, or, I thought I teched that, but I didn't, or this game has delay, or, this character is lame. That's an especially bad one, is, this matchup sucks, or, I hate this button, there's nothing I can do. This unproductive defeatism that is hiding the actual problem, which is, I don't have an answer to this button. And so instead of spending time thinking about how to find an answer to the button, you're just sitting there going, this button's broken. But I did nothing wrong, this button's just broken. No. That character loses all the time. You can beat that character, you're just not. And so the answer to you beating the button, or to winning the matchup, or to winning lane, or whatever, it comes from that awareness of, okay, what can I do to improve my decision making or my mechanics? And avoiding, it's my teammate, it's my controller, it's 3 a.m., I'm on a losing streak, whatever. I was throwing, I'm just playing secondaries today. Like, it's all just a bunch of unproductive excuse making. Okay, next slide. So we talked about this a little bit already, right? So this is an example of that idea, right? We want to take responsibility for our own results. This is kind of the key to defeating the Dunning-Kruger effect for someone who is in that situation where they are a mid-level player and they are objectively very ignorant about what the game looks like at the top level. Again, I use ignorant in the most neutral way possible. Like, if you were not ignorant of how the game is played at a high level, you would not be silver. Period. Because the people who understand the game at the high level are ranked high. Like, it's all very justified. And so, like, I think taking responsibility internally is kind of the key to defeating Dunning-Kruger or mitigating it on a personal level, and avoiding these external factors. So, this example, I lost because my controller or keyboard or mouse or whatever was having issues, and the cognitive bias is making you do loops in your head to justify why that sentence makes sense. And so whenever you hear a player say, it's my controller, it's my keyboard, this matchup sucks. No. There's a thought process behind the statement. So in this case, a controller, John, would be, I didn't make any wrong decisions. It's my hardware's fault. I don't need to change. I don't need to practice. I don't need to train. I don't need to think about what I could have done differently. It was my controller. So that is a destructive thought. and is unproductive and will not help you improve. So the fix is you need to just have a different thought go through your head. And you don't have to be amazing at the game to replace these thought processes. All you have to do is sit there and be thoughtful. Again, the theme is metacognition, right? We are thinking about how we think about these ideas. And so in this case, the more productive mindset would be, I don't know this matchup very well. Instead of saying, I'm losing these interactions because this character's broken, like, maybe I should just study these interactions more and see what options I even have. Like, how much time have I really put into knowing how these interactions work before I just threw in the towel and say it's impossible? Little things that make a big deal. Okay, so another page. This is kind of going back into what we've been talking about. Again, I'm not here to explain a ton of different ideas. The Dunning-Kruger effect and metacognition thinking in general is very complex, and so my goal is to explain what the idea is and then reiterate over and over again in different ways of saying it what it means, because I really want the idea to stick. And sometimes you need to have something explained differently for individuals to kind of let it sink in. So again, some ideas, right? Productive thoughts that can dispel Dunning-Kruger effect thinking traps. So even if you don't personally think you're struggling from Dunning-Kruger, I want you to think about these statements, and I want you to think about if they could apply to your gameplay or how you handle loss, how you handle defeat, how you handle stress or losing in general. And I think that most people will find that at least one of these sentences will strike true, or at least be something that they struggle with. And so, like, that should comfort you. Like, everybody struggles with this at some amount, and you can fix it. Again, being ignorant is not a big deal. Just apply some of these thought processes and change how you think about the activating event that happens and pisses you off. So the first one, right? My wins or losses, even in team games, are the result of my own training and performance. This thought is designed to dispel the idea of my teammate is heavy. Get rid of it. You're always going to have heavy teammates. You know what? In a 5v5 game, you're only allowed to have 4 heavy teammates, and your opponent gets to have 5. So the odds should always favor you, provided you yourself are not heavy. So that's what the sentence means, right? My own training and performance are what define my wins and losses, because I should be focusing on making myself not heavy, not worrying about whether my teammate is heavy. That thinking trap is very common, and is especially in team games like Overwatch, League of Legends, Valorant. Having a Zen forgiveness of people being bad. It's okay. You're going to live. Focus on yourself. Second one, if I want to improve, I should not get mad at my teammates or my equipment. So again, this goes back to the idea of external blame versus internal reflection. We don't want to blame external factors. The only consistent factor every time you sit down to play the game is you. And the sooner that you admit that to yourself in the deepest part of your ego, the sooner you'll be able to let go of blaming external factors and work on improving your own mentality for making better decisions. Third statement, I'm never above self-improvement and should regularly train my technical skills so that I can be as consistent as I can be. And this is just saying that no matter how talented a player is, there's no substitute for hard work, and there's no substitute for putting in the time and practicing efficiently. And this again goes to, the first thing, my wins or losses are the results of my own training. So what does your training look like? If you just go into if you just go to tournaments and you don't practice, you don't do warm-ups, you don't train, your results are going to reflect your lack of preparation. And people who are worse than you but are training might get better results than you, because they're setting themselves up for success. Because again, it's that internal reflection, right? How can I make myself not heavy? How can I make sure that I am as consistent as possible? And by focusing on little stuff like tech skill, you can shore up those issues. The last statement here at the bottom, I am not above players, and it is not beneath me to accept advice from my peers or even my opponents. I should accept criticism, praise, and advice with a good attitude and try to objectively look at information given instead of sulking about it. And I have to mention this one because, it doesn't matter how good you are at this game. You can have a destructive and unproductive ego. I think that having an ego and having confidence is not bad, but I think that you need to understand when to shelve it in order to focus on growth. In other words, it's okay to trash talk and it's okay to feel confident, but if you allow your pride to get in the way of somebody giving you objectively good advice that could help you improve, you're holding yourself back because you think you're too good for it. And this sadly happens a lot, and it's preventable. It is preventable. So, if any of these sentences ring for you, and you're like, wow, this sounds kind of like what happens to me. Feels bad, man. If this is you, take the sentence, copy it. Write it down somewhere and look at it daily. It's a little extreme, to look at it daily like it's some kind of, worshipful text. But the idea is you want to change your thinking. And so, you take these thoughts and replace the destructive ones that you have with these thoughts. And it will help you have a more consistent attitude that reflects what a winner's looks like. That's all I have. This is very short, talk. I didn't really have a ton to talk about it. This idea itself is complex enough that I just wanted to only talk about it. And I'll have more subjects down the road. Okay, thanks for everybody tuning in. Next week we should have some more. I would like to really kind of dive deep into resiliency, so expect some of that next week. Okay, thank you.